John Law. In the annals of financial history, his name is often uttered with a hint of scandal, synonymous with a colossal deception. Yet he was no ordinary swindler. This Scottish adventurer, a fugitive murderer, a masterful gambler, and a mathematical genius, born to a banker, perceived the world differently from others. He didn't merely play cards, he discerned universal patterns within them, patterns he believed also governed vast financial flows. After a duel and his escape from England, Law spent many years wandering across Europe, but not idly. He meticulously studied banking, the mechanisms of credit, and the principles of money circulation. He harbored a radical idea. National wealth lay not in gold, but in the circulation of paper money backed by state assets. This concept was so revolutionary, it verged on madness. However, Law managed to convince the Regent of France himself, the Duke of Orléans, who had inherited a ruined country after the death of Louis XIV. Granted carte blanche, Law became France's financial controller, effectively its economic dictator. He founded the Banque Générale, later renamed the Banque Royale, the country's first central bank to issue paper money. He then established the Compagnie d'Occident, or Mississippi Company, to which all trading rights for French territories in North America were granted. France, mired in debt, suddenly found itself on the cusp of unprecedented prosperity. Shares in the Mississippi Company soared to dizzying heights, creating history's first financial bubble. Madness reigned on the streets of Paris. Yesterday's servants became millionaires in a matter of days. Popular myth often paints John Law as a calculated swindler who deliberately defrauded an entire nation. This, however, is far from the truth. Law was fanatically convinced of his system's genius, genuinely believing he was saving France. His grand experiment was not malicious fraud, but an incredibly ambitious yet tragically naive attempt to revolutionize the global economy. Behind the facade of his grand experiment, beneath the veneer of the frenzied Parisian market, lay a personality forged on the brink of genius and despair. John Law was born into the family of an Edinburgh jeweler and banker, which gave him not just access to money, but a unique opportunity from an early age to observe its circulation, its movement, its power. A boy from a prosperous family, he distinguished himself from youth not only by his sharp mind, but also by an untamed adventurousness, evident both at the card table and in his personal life. At 23, in the prime of his youth, Law committed an act that irrevocably altered his life. A duel in central London resulted in the death of his opponent, Edward Wilson. The sentence was death, but Law fled. This escape was more than just a flight from the gallows, it was his initiation, his point of no return. As an exile, he lost everything that connected him to his familiar world, family, status, homeland. He became a man without roots, condemned to wander across Europe. But it was precisely this desperate freedom, this forced isolation from conventions, that allowed his mind to blossom fully, unconstrained by any dogmas or traditions. He was not tied to the old doctrines, to the gold standard that European monarchs clung to. His mathematical genius, honed at the card table, where he saw not just luck, but complex probabilistic models, was now directed towards studying money flows. He studied the Dutch and Venetian banking systems, analyzing their errors and successes. He saw that a country's true wealth lay not in accumulated bullion, but in the velocity of circulation, in the energy that money transmits to the economy. His conviction that paper money, backed by state assets, could become the driving force of prosperity was not just a theory. It was his personal philosophy, his answer to the imperfections of a world that had rejected him. For Law, this was not a means of enrichment, but a mission. He was not interested in personal accumulation. He was willing to risk everything to prove his point. This obsession, bordering on fanaticism, was a product of his unique path, a scion of a wealthy family who became a fugitive murderer and then a prophet of a new economy. He saw himself as a savior, not a mere dealer. It was this deeply personal, almost religious conviction in the righteousness of his system, rather than the cold calculation of a swindler, that led France to unprecedented heights, and ultimately to a devastating fall. This grand gamble was made possible only because France itself was on the brink of an abyss. When Louis XIV passed away in 1715, it seemed as though the very kingdom died with him. The sun, which he had symbolized for so long, had set, leaving behind only coldness and shadows. His 72-year reign, filled with endless wars, the construction of Versailles, and absolute monarchy, had exhausted the country to its limits. France, once the most powerful nation in Europe, had become a financial ruin. The treasury was empty. State debt had reached astronomical proportions, amounting to 2 billion livres, a sum unimaginable at the time and utterly unmanageable for a bankrupt monarchy. Each year, expenditures exceeded revenues by tens of millions. The tax system was chaotic and unjust, primarily burdening the poorest segments of the population, while the nobility and clergy enjoyed numerous privileges. The crown could no longer borrow money, as trust in its solvency had been thoroughly undermined. Creditors demanded their due, but there was nothing to pay with. Default seemed inevitable. In this atmosphere of desperation and hopelessness, the regent, the Duke of Orléans, who had assumed the reins of power from the 5-year-old Louis XV, faced catastrophe. He was a man who recognized the need for change, but lacked a clear plan. Traditional methods of crisis management, raising taxes or devaluing currency, no longer worked, only exacerbating the suffering of the 20 million people who constituted France's population. Discontent reigned in the streets, hunger and destitution became a common reality for millions. In such a situation, any idea, no matter how incredible, that offered a way out of the deadlock began to seem salvific. A society exhausted by debt and hopelessness was ready to grasp at any straw that promised a quick and miraculous deliverance from suffering. It was precisely this desperate state of France, its complete economic and social disorientation, that created the ideal ground for the emergence and development of history's most audacious financial experiment. Into that abyss of despair, where traditional solutions seemed powerless, John Law entered not as just another advisor, but as a prophet of a new era. His ideas, previously rejected in other European capitals, found fertile ground here in Paris. The Duke of Orléans, desperate to find a way out of the financial quagmire, gave Law a chance, which he immediately seized. In 1716, despite the skepticism of the majority, Law opened his Banque Générale, a private institution that, however, had the right to issue banknotes backed by gold and silver. This was the first audacious step towards revolution. France, like most European countries, had suffered for decades from the instability of metallic money, its constant debasement, clipping, and devaluation. Coins lost weight and trust. Law's paper banknotes, by contrast, were stable, had a fixed value, and were extremely convenient for transactions. Law guaranteed their exchange for full-weight gold and silver on demand, an unheard-of audacity for the era. This simple yet revolutionary innovation instantly won public trust. People, tired of constant financial manipulations with coins, appreciated the stability and reliability of the new notes. Soon, realizing the astounding success of the Banque Générale, the Regent transformed it into the Banque Royale, France's first central bank, and now its banknotes were backed not only by precious metals, but also by the credit obligations of the state itself. This step allowed Law to freely issue money, injecting vital liquidity into the depleted economy and preparing the ground for the next, even larger undertaking. But Law was not content with simply issuing money. His ambitions extended much further. He envisioned something grander, a colossal financial scheme designed to resolve the enormous state debt. In that same year, 1716, Law created the Compagnie d'Occident, later renamed the Mississippi Company. It was granted exclusive rights to trade and develop the vast, yet largely unexplored French territories of Louisiana in North America. The sale of shares in this company, it was assumed, would attract immense funds. This is where the most audacious part of his scheme began, ultimately transforming it into an uncontrollable, speculative machine. Law proposed that holders of state bonds, which were practically worthless due to the threat of default, exchange them for shares in the Mississippi Company. The idea was brilliant. The government shed its unmanageable debts, and creditors received not worthless paper, but stakes in the potentially untold riches of the New World. Initially, demand was moderate, but Law, using his Banque Royale, began actively stimulating the market. The bank issued new banknotes, which were then used to purchase shares in the Mississippi Company. This created artificial demand and pumped money into the market. Law skillfully played the card of national grandeur and colonial prospects, painting vivid pictures of the abundance awaiting France through the development of Louisiana. To enhance the enterprise's appeal, Law constantly expanded the Mississippi Company's powers and assets. In 1719, it absorbed other major trading companies, including the East India and China companies, effectively gaining a monopoly on all of France's foreign trade. Moreover, it was granted the rights to collect all state taxes and mint coins. Law now controlled France's entire financial and commercial life. Soon after, he merged the Mississippi Company with the Banque Royale into a single gigantic conglomerate, the Compagnie des Indes, General India Company. This merger signaled the beginning of an unprecedented speculative frenzy. The company's shares, fueled by relentless advertising of Louisiana's gold mountains and the continuous issuance of banknotes by the Banque Royale, began their dizzying ascent. Rue Quincampoix in Paris became the epicenter of an unprecedented speculative frenzy. On this narrow street, life pulsed, and fortunes shifted dramatically. Crowds of people, from aristocrats to servants, flocked there to buy or sell shares. Prices rose daily, sometimes doubling in a matter of hours or even minutes. People who had nothing yesterday awoke as millionaires. Coachmen, maids, soldiers, everyone rushed into this new gold rush. In a few months, shares increased tenfold, their value soaring past 10,000 livres, though they had started at 500. Those who bought them early could sell them for exorbitant sums, creating the illusion of easy and boundless enrichment. Law's bank readily provided loans against shares, allowing people to buy even more, thereby further inflating the bubble. House owners on Quincampoix rented rooms at astronomical prices, and their balconies transformed into impromptu stock exchanges. This was more than just a stock market game. It was a pervasive madness that infected the entire capital, a blind faith in endless growth bolstered by apparent prosperity. And although John Law sincerely believed in the fundamental value of his enterprises, he could not or would not see that genuine wealth cannot grow from nothing, and endless money issuance without real backing merely postpones the inevitable collapse. This unprecedented spectacle, played out on the streets of Paris, was no accident. It was the result of a masterful management of human emotions, rooted in John Law's personal qualities and his deep understanding of crowd psychology. Law possessed a magnetic charisma, capable of enchanting even the most skeptical interlocutors. He didn't merely expound economic theories, he sold a vision, a dream of unprecedented prosperity, painting it so convincingly that even seasoned courtiers and financiers succumbed to his charm. He knew how to speak to people in their own language, promising not abstract benefits for the state, but personal, tangible wealth. His true genius lay in his ability to skillfully exploit the most powerful human vice: greed. Law didn't just offer shares, he created an atmosphere of a universal race for wealth where anyone could become a millionaire literally overnight. He deliberately fostered rumors of fantastic gold and jewel reserves in Louisiana, even though he was well aware of their exaggeration. Stories of coachmen becoming noblemen, of maids buying mansions, were not accidental urban legends. They were actively disseminated, becoming a powerful marketing tool. These stories served as bait, compelling ever-increasing segments of the population, from petty merchants to aristocrats, to invest their last savings in Mississippi Company shares, unwilling to be left out of the universal feast. To amplify this effect, Law employed a set of sophisticated influence techniques. He didn't just issue money, he meticulously controlled its entry into the market, creating artificial scarcity, followed by a sudden release that provoked panic buying and price surges. His Banque Royale readily provided loans against shares, allowing people to buy even more, thereby further inflating the speculative bubble. This was a well-thought-out strategy. The more people involved, the more paper earnings they accrued, the stronger their belief in the system's inviolability became, and the louder they became its advocates. Law also skillfully leveraged his court connections, securing official decrees and privileges for his company, which endowed it with an aura of legitimacy and infallibility in the public eye. Law's personal capacity for adaptation and strategic thinking was astonishing. When the initial excitement around the shares began to wane, he reacted immediately by expanding the company's powers, attaching new monopolies to it, from foreign trade to tax collection and even coin minting. Each such acquisition was presented as a triumph, as evidence of the Mississippi Company's growing power and inexhaustible potential, repeatedly rekindling investor interest. He constantly changed the rules of the game to keep it exciting, continuously fueling the thirst for profit with new promises. His methods were so effective that he not only subjugated France's financial system, but also completely captivated the minds of its citizens, turning them into accomplices in a grand yet doomed experiment. In this whirlwind game, where the fate of an entire nation hung in the balance, the key figure, besides Law himself, was Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, the Regent of France. His position was unenviable. He inherited a country on the verge of collapse, with an empty treasury and colossal debts. For him, John Law became not just an advisor, but a last hope, a daring gamble in a desperate game. The Duke, an educated man, but indecisive and prone to compromise, saw in Law's ideas not just an economic plan, but an opportunity to avoid unpopular measures, default, tax increases, or a new war. He gave Law carte blanche, hoping that this Scottish visionary could perform an economic miracle. And initially, Law lived up to his expectations. The treasury filled, debts seemed to vanish, and the regent, having avoided the disgrace of bankruptcy, enjoyed unprecedented popularity, becoming the patron of history's boldest financial experiment. Under this generous patronage, a whole class of new beneficiaries flourished. Not only coachmen and maids who became millionaires, but also members of high society, aristocrats, courtiers, even members of the royal family, who, mired in debt, saw the Mississippi Company's shares as a lifeline. Many of them used their connections to gain access to shares on the most favorable terms, and then resold them at a profit, investing nothing but their name. Paris was flooded with stories of fabulous fortunes made in a matter of days. Yesterday's debtors built mansions, threw extravagant balls, displaying their sudden wealth with provocative luxury. This new elite, whose wealth was based on paper rather than land or title, began to dictate social norms, fostering unprecedented social mobility. For some, it was the embodiment of the American dream on French soil. For others, a scandalous violation of all traditional norms. However, not everyone was willing to dance to John Law's tune. In the shadow of his triumphant march, a powerful voice of opposition grew, embodied by the main antagonist of his system, the Parlement of Paris. This influential body, composed of hereditary judges and magistrates, was the guardian of France's old traditions and laws. For centuries, the Parlement had often served as a barrier to the absolute power of kings, disputing their decrees and defending its own privileges. They viewed law's paper money not as a brilliant innovation, but as a mortal threat, an undermining of foundations built on gold and silver. For them, wealth lay not in ephemeral paper, but in land, in precious metals, in centuries-old traditions. The conflict between law and the Parlement was inevitable. The magistrates refused to register decrees that granted law's company ever-increasing monopolies. They openly expressed distrust of his paper money, seeing it merely as a means to devalue real assets and undermine state stability. The Parlement attempted to ban the use of banknotes, appealing to common sense and age-old traditions. Law, with his fanatical belief in his system and the Regent's support, had no intention of backing down. He responded harshly. By order of the Duke of Orléans, members of the Parlement were exiled from Paris, and their powers were temporarily suspended. This was a show of force, but also a sign of growing tension. While law secured a temporary victory in this political struggle, the conflict with the Parlement left a deep crack in the trust placed in his system. The opposition, though suppressed, continued to spread rumors, sow doubts, and await their moment, sensing that infinite growth on nothing could not last